Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello, readers, and welcome to episode 48 of Fully Booked. I'm your host, Natalie, and today's episode is going to be RM coded, as I'm going to be sharing about a few of RM's favorite books that I read over the past few months. This episode really was one in the making, I gotta say. And I decided to do this in honor of his birthday, which is September 12th. So happy early birthday. But also as yet another challenge for myself. Now, I've seen this concept of reading a celebrity's favorite books done many times on BookTube, particularly with Taylor Swift. But I believe I've only seen 2 booktubers cover RM's favorite books so far. So I thought I'd try reading some of his faves, especially since I really want to get more into Korean literature. And for those of you who are not into K-pop and are asking, who is RM? RM is the leader of BTS. If you don't know who they are, I'm a little lost for words at that. But yes, he's also one of the rappers and goes by Rap Monster, Real Me, Kim Namjoon, and my new personal one that I came up with, Reading Monster. For real though, RM is a huge bookworm and has been filmed reading multiple times on their variety shows and has talked many times about how he loves to read. And I've gone through his list of read books thanks to the internet, and not only is it long, but there are a ton of great books on his reading list. One thing I did wonder is if regardless he reads all of them in Korean, because I would assume that while he is known for his self-taught English, and he can speak English pretty well, Korean would still be a bit easier to comprehend, especially considering some of these dense thematic novels that were on the list. And since I wanted to give myself enough time to get through enough of these titles, I ended up picking and completing 5 books on his list. And I'm not going to waste any more time here, so let's just get into these 5 favorite books of RM's that I read. So starting with the first book, I read I Want to Die, But I Want to Eat Tteokboki by Baek Se-hee, which I rated 3.75 stars. To preface, I read this book back in January, so quite a while before the release of this episode, but I can still say now that this book was impactful. So to try to sum it up, it's basically a series of transcripts of therapy sessions between the author and her therapist, making this nonfiction, just to clarify for anyone like me who thought this book was fictional. And there's a summary from the author at the end of each session or chapter. Baek Se-hee talks about various issues that she deals with due to her dysthymia, such as judgment of others, self-doubt, and her inability to maintain long-term relationships. And while I could try to explain and examine this book further, I thought instead for once, it'd be nice to read some of the quotes that I highlighted to really show and not tell you what this book is about. If we have a habit of judging people from a simplistic perspective, that perspective will eventually turn against ourselves. And then new quote, I just hope you learn to differentiate the parts from the whole. Just because you like one thing about a person, you don't need to like everything about them. And just because you don't like one thing about a person, it doesn't mean the person as a whole isn't worth your time. And then the last quote, when we're sinking in water, it can be a relief to feel the ground beneath our feet, the rock bottom, because we know we can kick against it to rise again. But if you can't feel the ground in life, the fear can be overwhelming. And after reading those again, I can honestly say that I thought the author did a fairly good job talking about the nuances of depression, and it was kind of refreshing in a way to read about some of the middle tier and not just highs and lows of depression. As someone who's experienced certain symptoms myself, but was never diagnosed. I think my fault with this book was I kind of wish there had been more positive resolution reached from these therapy sessions, as while she became more highly aware, it felt like she was still kind of stuck in this cycle even by the end of the book, which to be fair is more realistic, but I think having more actionable thoughts would inspire readers like myself further. And some of the sessions got repetitive to read about since she's literally going over the same issues in different situations over and over again. But overall, if you're looking for a book with some interesting takeaways on coping with mental health and depression and dysthymia in particular, or if you just want to find out why she eats tteokboki, then give this book a shot. And then the next book I read of RM's was The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I did not give a rating because I don't give ratings to very short stories such as these. Okay, I've had this on my TBR for a while thanks to RM, as well as Jack Edwards, who funnily enough is one of the booktubers who has covered RM's favorite books as well. Anyways, I didn't expect this short story to leave me so perplexed, even though the premise presented is fairly simple out of context, so to speak. I actually can't believe I didn't read this sooner, as it's a highly talked about story because of the question it poses. Also, I'm just gonna basically spoil the whole thing because it's only 30 pages, so there's no way for me to give a non-spoiler review of something so short. So if you haven't read it yet and still want to read and find out for yourself, feel free to skip ahead to the next timestamp so you don't get spoiled. Basically, the story is set in the city of Omelas where all the residents are happy. FYI, that's part of Salem, Oregon, spelled backwards, which apparently the author passed by a road sign, and that is how she got the inspiration. Except for this one child that stays locked away on their own and only sees people to be given food and drink and occasionally looked upon. And this child cannot be freed, as the happiness and abundance of Omelas would be gone if done so. So this story presents a simple yet complicated question, as without thinking much about it, most of us would automatically say to free the child because no one should have to suffer that greatly. But what are the consequences, and will the child truly be free considering all the realities of life? This actually reminds me a little bit of a movie called Gone Baby Gone. It's one starring Casey Affleck, Morgan Freeman, where basically the detectives find out one of their own was responsible for the kidnapping of this young girl. And there's a debate at the end of where and who the child belongs with. And to me at least, the movie leaves it unclear if the right choice was for the girl to be with her mother, as her mother starts the same bad behavior we see from the start of the movie. It's a picture that goes to show you how truly complex real life situations can be, given we all have different perceptions. And I think it also boils down to valuing temporary versus the future, or eternity rather. If you value temporary, then you will only pick what makes you happy and fulfilled in the moment, without a lot of foresight. But if you value the future or eternity, then you will make the harder choices that could leave you in suffering for some period of time, but do good for many others around you. I feel like I could go on and on at this point because there was so much imagery and nuance in this story that could be discussed. But I think I'll mostly leave it there because honestly, part of me is still scratching my head a bit on what is the main point and how does one even summarize this story. Now, in terms of RM, I'm not sure if he ever directly referenced this story. However, Omelas is actually referenced in BTS's music video Spring Day, visually and thematically. First, where RM is seen walking towards J-Hope and Suga, sitting outside a hotel called Omelas. Now, thematically, this is where it gets a bit tricky because this short story is potentially one of the trickiest so far for me to interpret, if you couldn't already tell. The author even said herself in the afterword that there is no single correct interpretation of this story. I think one of the most noticeable common themes is the transition of growing up from child to adulthood. So in this story of Omelas, it mentions that children of a certain age are taken to see the suffering child, where the age range of 8 to 12, and the event itself symbolizes a rite of passage for those children into society, to join a collective responsibility as well as be responsible for their own actions. And in BTS's Spring Day, the transition of seasons and emphasis on growing up showcase this theme. In addition, I read an article that speculated on the scenes in the video where the, quote, no vacancy sign is lit up versus it's unlit near the end of the video, meaning that BTS are the ones who walk away from Omelas. Which also makes sense given that the album Spring Day was on is called You Never Walk Alone. And in the story, the ones who leave Omelas sort of go together and know exactly where they're going. Also, this is supposed to be talking about all of RM's favorite books and not just BTS, so I'll stop the analysis here. But one more note that I'll make is that while BTS were all somewhat involved in the making of the video, RM is mainly responsible for the melody and lyrics of Spring Day. So I think it's pretty cool that they were able to throw all this imagery and themes into the song that relate back to this very interesting book. All right, and then I took quite a bit of a break after reading Omelas, but we were able to return to RM's favorite books, and I picked up Almond by Won Sun Pyong, which I ended up giving 3.5 stars. Now, to preface this one a bit, this is basically a literary fiction novel that focuses on this young boy named Yoonjae, and he is born with this condition called alexithymia, where he basically can't express emotions normally and in everyday situations like the rest of us would. And because of that, he struggles a lot to interact with the world around him and those in his life. And so we basically follow him and his mother and his grandmother, as well as another cast of characters. There's also like this big tragedy, I guess, that happens early on in the book that changes his life path, I guess. And I won't say what that is because I don't want to spoil the book. But yeah, that changes his world quite a bit and introduces a bunch of different characters in his life who end up supporting him and kind of mentoring him. He also ends up making friends with a boy his age in his high school years. Yeah, I don't know. The story kind of just mainly just focuses on him and telling the story through his perspective and all these different events and how he does or doesn't rather reacts to them. Now, I have a bunch of things to say about this book. I want to say that I feel like this book kind of suffered from the same problems as actually the first book I talked about, where not that it was repetitive, but I feel like there just wasn't that much development. Yeah, overall, I wanted to see more, especially character development, especially with a character like this, who has this, actually, I don't know if this is a rare condition or not, but yeah, you don't meet someone with this particular condition every day, and I wanted to see him go through a lot more and see how it would change him and whether he was able to like learn how to express himself a bit more by the end of the book. And I felt like with this story, by the time we got to the end, he hadn't really changed or grown that much, at least as I was expecting. I think I was just expecting a lot more. I don't know if this is just like the style and structure of Korean literature as well, because I feel like, yeah, a couple of like Korean literature books that I've read so far are kind of like this. They don't have these super crazy plots and like character growth like that maybe we're used to seeing in North American written books. It's also hard to judge and to rate, I guess, a book like this because there are also so many different perceptions in society, obviously, between Western and Eastern culture, and I think that plays a factor into how this story was told, probably how the author wrote this book. Yeah, I think I'm just not used to Korean literature overall. But yeah, I think the one note I want to make is that to see more character growth, it would have been nice if we gone to follow Yoonjae over a longer period of time, because I thought that's what the book was going to do. And I like books that span over a longer period of time and where we have these unique characters, because then we really get to see how much they grow, change, and adapt depending on what happens in their life, challenges, suffering. I feel like we just got such a short time with this character that there wasn't time for me to get attached to him. And because of this condition and his voice is supposed to have this detached sound, it made it even harder for me to feel emotionally towards our main protagonist in this story. It's kind of a letdown because I saw a lot of other people rated this like 4 or 5 stars, and I just didn't really see it or experience that personally. But again, I'm liking, I guess, I don't know if it's a trend necessarily, but I guess the upward trend of exploring mental health in Korean or probably even other East Asian literature with novels like these. So I would still recommend this, again, like with the first one, if you want to get some of that perspective. Hey readers, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and hear me out before you hit skip. I'm so grateful for all my listeners who are with me on this reading journey, and I'd like to ask that if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review as it helps others find the podcast. Also, please consider supporting the podcast financially as it helps me bring you more exciting content, and you'll get some extras like bonus and subscriber-only episodes, early access to new episodes, and much more. The link to donate will be in the show notes below, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/fullybookedpod. Thank you so much again for choosing to listen to Fully Booked, and now back to the episode. And then the fourth book that I read of RM's was Kim Jiyoung, born 1982 by Cho Namju, which, funnily enough, is actually very close to RM's real name. And I ended up rating this one 3.25 stars. So, likewise to Almond, this book suffered the problem of having the reader more disconnected from the MC, which maybe this is just more typical writing style in Korean literature, because I've been finding this same issue in every book I've read so far. To be fair, third-person narrative can be good. I've clearly enjoyed it in other books. I just wish it had kept us more connected to our FMC in this book. And I think the main reason why I didn't love this book was because it felt like more of a universal tale of misogyny and societal issues women face in South Korea, rather than specifically what Jiyoung, our FMC, was going through. Especially because there'd be lots of statistics inserted in the middle of every single chapter, in between all the main events that we were recapping from her life. And you guys know, I'm very much in my character-driven era and wanted to know a bit more about how Jiyoung felt, or just more detail on certain parts of her life that we were kind of being told, but only getting glimpses of. Like the dating period with her husband, we basically just glossed over that. We also didn't really go over how or why she started deteriorating mentally, and only went through some final diagnosis at the very end. I don't know, I guess I just didn't really expect this to be a more almost real life commentary, which there were definitely some points in history I learned about that I didn't know before. I think I was just looking for more of a story, which this wasn't really, at least for me. And then the final book I read of RM's was Human Acts by Han Kang, which I gave a whopping 4.5 stars, the first book on the list to receive an over 4-star rating. I will say, again, this book follows the same structure as the previous books I read, where there's not a huge plot going on, but rather we get a series of multiple POVs from 7 different people who lived through the 1980 Gwangju Uprising, also known as the Gwangju Democratization Movement in South Korea. And I do actually remember watching a movie on this uprising, and it really began to open my eyes to all parts of South Korean history, and this especially is a very important piece in their 20th century history, I would say. There are definitely some bloody parts of Korea's past, and this book continued to open my eyes and give me further insight as to how the uprising and associated acts of violence affected so many people and left people in so much destruction, pain, and loss. And while I didn't technically read the original words, obviously because I read it in English, and the translator stressed that this book was not a direct translation, but rather the original essence was captured. The writing style was absolutely hauntingly beautiful. I actually highlighted so many quotes from this book because the descriptions just left me in such a reflective state. The author just did a really great job at choosing language that captured the characters' depth of emotion, and that's what really made this book for me compared to the rest that I read on RM's list. And whether it was themes and emotions around violence, misogyny, grief, wanting to be treated as human, she just really captured how I can only imagine the victims would have felt. Although I do want to warn you guys that some descriptions in this story were quite graphic in terms of the violence and depicting physical death, but surprisingly, at least for me, even the parts that were hard to read still left me wanting more of the writing and of this story. Anyways, I would definitely recommend this book if you're interested in learning more of one part of South Korean history and you like very haunting stories and writing. And that concludes my wrap-up of some of RM's favorite books. Hope you all enjoyed listening, and shout out to anyone who is also a RM bias, but I will admit that V is probably my second/bias wrecker. Honestly, overall, I really can't wait for BTS's reunion, which is hopefully coming very, very soon at this rate. And let me know if you guys want to hear a part 2 where I cover more favorite celebrity reads. Also, a quick note that this will hopefully be the last audio-only episode for a while, as I begin transitioning over to being more of a video podcast. If you still enjoy listening on audio, don't worry, I will still be posting on all the usual platforms. But a reminder that if you want to see my face in every episode, as well as be notified anytime I upload, subscribe to the pod on YouTube, because there will be lots more videos coming your way the rest of this year and hopefully beyond. And for those still listening on audio right now, the link is always in the show notes along with the rest of my socials. Anyways, I want you all to remember that no matter what, no season can last forever, and that can actually be a good thing because change helps us to grow, and your spring day is always ahead. But with all that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you back here for the next episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.